this computer. And I'm going to share this screen. And can everybody see this? All right, cool.
Yes.
Welcome. Thanks for being part of my little morning presentation here, a little hidden Huntington Beach presentation. The reason I wanted to do this is because I thought to do this as a post would have been really cumbersome. There's a bunch of images that I think help unpack the story of this photo. And I thought this might be a more fun, interactive way to do it. And it's totally cool seeing all of you here and being able to put some faces and voices to names. So thank you for being here. This photo. I first saw this photo about 20 years ago. I was working on my first book about Huntington Beach, and it was like 1999, I think, 2000-ish. And I was down at City Hall working with Alicia Wentworth, who was a city historian, going through lots of photos. And this one fell out of a box, and I couldn't stop staring at it. And even looking at it right now, I still can't stop staring at it. I'm not even sure why. There's something, for starters, that when you look at pictures of Huntington Beach, typically they're very tourist friendly, especially kind of official photos like this. And this is not. There's something really ominous and dark about this photo on the one hand, but there's also something very powerful when you realize that this is almost immediately after oil was discovered 100 years ago this year. This is a centennial of oil being discovered. And I just, I have a thing about photos. I've written a lot of other books about trying to locate exact locations. I'm really into that idea of stepping into a spot and kind of feeling what was going on there the day a photo was taken. And so this photo for me, also the angle of this photo is really weird. We're elevated. I started thinking we're probably on an oil derrick that took this. And it just spans out, and it seems to go on in infinity. And looking at this photo, the more I stare at it, it's almost like the smoke is actually wafting, the smoke that you see, the steam rising. It almost feels like it's moving. To me, it's very sensory. You can almost hear it. You can almost smell it. There's a lot going on here. And so I wanted to figure out exactly where this photo was taken. And so what I've put together here is a very brief presentation that isolates where it was taken. So what do we have at the beginning? The first thing I noticed when I look at this photo is the photographer's name. And Hoyer, I have researched, that name turns up on a number of old images of Southern California, postcard images and such, but I can't find out anything yet about this person. So I'm gonna come back to that down the line when I can decipher who this person was and what kind of images they were taking and what was sort of their method. Because again, it's all about the photographer. But a couple of things that initially jumped out at me in this photograph, beyond just the incredibly dramatic sense of horizon line and infinity, this idea of oil, wells going on forever, were the train tracks, which we see right here. So once you have train tracks in place in Huntington Beach, right there, it gives you kind of a finite beginning, because Huntington Beach had a very finite set of tracks. They weren't all over the place. They were very confined to certain areas. So once you have train tracks, you can at least begin to start deciphering a photograph. The other two elements here that jumped out at me were the cannery down here at the left, and this building down here at the right, which says the California National Supply Company. And again, I isolate that here with a red arrow. When you look closer at it, what was that building? I started looking that building up, and the address didn't match where I thought this would be. So moving forward, I had been doing some research about a place called the Pacific Oilcloth and Linoleum Company. This factory that was being built, if you don't know, in Huntington Beach in about 1914, 1915, the city motto that you would see in the back of postcards was Huntington Beach, Industrial City by the Sea, which is really kind of bizarre when you think about it. But then again, when you know about Huntington Beach, you know that there was the Holly Sugar Factory, there was a broom factory, there was a tile factory, and there was then the oilcloth and linoleum factory. All of a sudden, you get a sense that pre-oil, Huntington Beach really was kind of a factory town by the sea. And what interested me in this, and why I wanted to learn more about it for an upcoming episode of Hidden Huntington Beach, is that you can see down here, Tom Talbert was the president of the oilcloth and linoleum company, and Newland was the vice president. But Talbert, for me, is a very intriguing figure, of course, one of the true kind of founding fathers of Huntington Beach. He was a politician, he was a businessman, he was the guy who founded Fountain Valley, but it was called Talbert because back then, that name wasn't accepted by the Postal Service. So Fountain Valley, until the 1950s, I believe, was called Talbert. And then, of course, Talbert comes over to Huntington Beach and establishes a very profound legacy here. So the fact that he had started this company, to me, was important. If you don't know what oilcloth was, it was sort of a precursor to vinyl. It was a fabric that was coated and used for tablecloths and placemats, things you could wipe up easily, very popular in 1913, 1914 when he was founding his company. So again, I'm doing research about this company and I do some background and, again, it's going to be a big deal. You can see they're offering stock in the company. Beach Factory turns out 5,000 yards of oilcloth every day. When Talbert was always in it to win it. When he established the company, it was interesting, but I wanted to know where that plant was. And there's a great little telltale sign here, that talks about located in the fast-growing manufacturing district. And that was out where the Holly sugar plant was and all of that. I went to look at the Sanborn Maps. Some of you are familiar with Sanborn Maps. Sanborn Maps, the company was founded, I believe, in the 1860s, and it was basically a fire insurance map company. And they made it so that agents wouldn't have to go out on site. They created this set of maps, and they were very, very intensely illustrated. And what was great about them is that the cartographers, the people who created the maps, they would go in the communities and actually add little facts about the community. So when you read Sanborn Maps, you learn a lot about what's going on. So I found the Pacific Oilcloth and Linoleum Company here. You can see the map on Clay Street in Alabama, when Alabama used to run all the way out through past Maine and Garfield. I noticed there were some notes here in terms of how the cartographers would do notations, not in operation since June 1922. This map was created in 1922, but a man lives on premises. And I thought that was interesting. Who was the guy that was living on the premises of this abandoned factory in 1922? And I also saw here, this was the telltale sign that gets us to the photograph. This section leased to the California National Supply Company. Now, why is that important? If we go back to our photo, that was the building here, the California National Supply Company. So all of a sudden now, we know where this building is and what it's doing there. I had a postcard of the Pacific Oilcloth and Linoleum Factory here, and I was able to match the frontage of that building with the part that was leased to the other company. So now we can start to really put together and isolate and locate where that photo was taken. Aerial shot here from about 1930, give you some sense of perspective. This is Huntington Beach High School right here. Over here is the Northam Ranch. City Hall today is located about here. But what we notice are the train tracks running out in Alabama hit what was then the oilcloth and linoleum factory right here. And if we move into that, we can isolate the building. And if we line it up to the Sanborn map image, it's the Sanborn logo, we can see that it matches exactly. So we know that's the building that we're talking about. That's the building that's in the lower right-hand portion of the photograph that I am so obsessed with. Now we can place all of a sudden that building. That building would have been on Clay. Alabama would have run up here, and we can see the train tracks in the photograph. Called it the train tracks. Well, the right of way we can see very clearly. So that building would have been sitting right about here, butting up against Clay. Tracks would have been here, and Alabama would have continued through back then. So now we're getting a sense of how we can truly line up this photograph and get the angle down of precisely how that photo was shot. Something else that jumped out to me, as I mentioned, was the cannery. There were canneries in Huntington Beach, not a lot of them. So I started doing some research about canneries around this same time, about 1914, 1915. And what I learned, had some old grocery ads, and I found that there was a Pierce Cannery in Huntington Beach. Began researching the Pierce Cannery. You can see I've isolated here in this ad. And the Pierce Cannery, in 1914, it was named after, again, M.L. Pierce, who has been packing a few tomatoes for the past 4 years. He'll pack 4 carloads this year. He's doing this at home. But as the article goes on to say, Mr. Pierce has made arrangements with the Huntington Beach Company for the warehouse on the Southern Pacific near the factory of the Pacific Oilcloth and Linoleum Company. So now we know that that's the Pierce Cannery in the photo, which again just helps unpack and give perspective to what that business district was like. Those were there before oil was discovered. Again, these companies opened in about 1915. So now Now we can truly say this is precisely where that photo was taken. The cannery would have been down here, that piece of the linoleum factory would have been right here, and all of the other wells would have been out here. Now, where was it taken exactly? Again, that's just kind of a then and now where you can see how it would have been. And again, there's of course nothing left from the old photo, but we've been able to isolate precisely where it was taken. Now, the picture was, where was the picture taken from? This is another part of a photograph that to me, the angle, depth, perspective, those are really important things. So I estimated that photo was taken right about here, but from where? Again, I would assume it was on another oil derrick. So what I did is I went back and looked at oil maps and determined that there was a well, there was a derrick right here. And if you look at the northeastern angle pointing to where that photo was taken, I believe I even have a photo of that actual derrick. And if we go to another aerial shot from about 1930, we can see the derrick here pointing in the direction of the building right here. Here are the trains lined up. Here's the piece of the building. Here's the cannery down here. So I would guesstimate with fair certainty that that's the derrick that this photographer had climbed up on to capture the image that again has so captivated me. So now we know, at least in that area when we're over by Clay, we know pretty much precisely where it was taken, what it looks like today, and where everything sat. And so I have to tell you, when I first saw this photo originally, I didn't think it was Huntington Beach. To me, it looked too dense. It just didn't fit what any other photo looked like. Here, I thought it might be Signal Hill or someplace like that, where you see these very more industrial looking images. But in fact, now we know exactly where it was. And to me, this is another way we can, when we talk about getting historic markers placed and plaques and things like that, I would love to do a little plaque series around where the factories were, where all of them were, starting with, of course, this one. Now, in terms of what happened to the buildings, the linoleum factory was destroyed almost completely by the 1933 earthquake. It was out of business at that point, and oil companies, Standard Oil, had taken it over. But the 33 quake basically knocked it down, and there was a fire soon afterwards that got rid of it. Now, the cannery building, that's been a trickier one to track down. I have one notation that says it was destroyed by fire in late 1920. If that date is true, what makes the photo even more interesting is it means that all of this was created in 1 year. Oil was first discovered around February, March, essentially Standard Oil, well number one. And it shows you what would have happened if that's the case, if it's accurate that this building burned down in late 1920, that all of this happened inside of 10 or 11 months, which to me is just stunning. The fact that this all could have been put together, it just gets to the explosive quality of what oil was like in Huntington Beach. And all of a sudden, the picture to me is less foreboding and really more about the future. It's the change, it's the churn, it's what puts us all here today, in fact, in Huntington Beach. Without this industry, that wouldn't have been able to carry it over from a kind of a sleepy seaside village with a handful of factories into what we know today as Huntington Beach. So for me, again, the photo, once you learn about why it's there and what was there, what was surrounding it, it takes on almost a whole different mood. Again, the first time I ever saw it, it was very dark and very bleak. When I look at it now, I think this is the industrial age of Huntington Beach in a snapshot, in one photo. We have the linoleum factory, oilcloth factory, we have the cannery, we have the trains, and we have oil. And again, in one compressed photo that tells, in a sense, the real story of Huntington Beach 100 years ago. So with that, if you're ever over in that area, now you know exactly what's there. And with that, if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them, or comments or anything. You can either raise your hand or do whatever you like, and I'll just sort of call you out.
Yeah, Chris.
Rick, why don't you go first, then we'll go to Jim.
I think what this is amazing, because I don't think there's that many pictures of the Huntington Street area and Clay area back there to see all the derricks. Everybody knows about the derricks downtown and going towards the beach, but that whole forest connected all the way across. It's pretty amazing. It's like you said, it's really neat that you found it to be that area. I wouldn't have guessed it would be right there. I didn't think it was that dense of a forest, but really
That's
cool
the
adventure
thing. And
there.
obviously, look, camera lenses have changed a lot in 100 years. And I think what this photographer captured is there is some compression involved. It definitely, I think, exaggerates the scene. I have aerial shots of that area, obviously, and you can see they're fairly well spaced out, but something about that photo brings it together in this really intense space where you see it, you feel it. I mean, you absolutely feel this photograph, and the fact that you had one of Talbert's buildings right there, you had this well-known local cannery right there. Like I said, it really does compress a lot of the industry of Huntington Beach in one photo. Jim, you had a comment?
Two questions and a comment. One, the comment is all of these derricks appear to be almost exactly the same height and the same design.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells me that some engineer somewhere came up with a very effective design and made a lot of money creating that product.
Great observation. And again, it's so new in the game. This is where they're discovering wells very quickly. If you read the news from back then, it's a daily news coverage. Another one here, another one there, strike after strike after strike. So just to keep up with it all, I think you're right. They had a very uniform, physical system in place to do it. But yeah, it's a good point. And I love the fact that it's the old wood. We get used to seeing the metal structures later.
Yeah.
The wooden ones really, I mean, it's like the old West. I mean, there's something about that design that I think harkens back to it's another age. It's another industrial age.
Yeah. My questions, the first question, the one derrick appears to have, the one that's front and center appears to have a sign on it.
Yeah.
And it's just far enough out of range that I can't make it out.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. It's Western. I'll blow it up and put it in the group later. I've done that already. I couldn't figure out exactly what it meant, but yeah, it seems to be identifying either one of the companies. I mean, this is standard property here, but Western is the big word that you see, and I'm not sure what it's exactly identifying. But yeah, I see what you're talking about there.
Yeah. I'm too a sign collector, and I'd love to have that sign.
Well, listen, we know about, I am too. And yeah, I'm hoping that I want to get into the public works one of these days, because I've heard tell that there could be some signage, maybe not that one, but other ones that could be compelling and take us back to the past.
Yeah. My third question is, what is the white surface that's behind the cannery? It looks almost like it's a liquid surface.
Let me open up the photo. Again, this is why sharing these things is so much fun, because I stare at it with my own lens and have my own sort of emphasis that I'm interested in.
Can you reshare your screen there, Chris, so we can see the picture again?
Yeah. So hold on one second. I actually just opened it for myself, but hold on one second.
Okay. It looked like the street is flooded there or something. That's clay, right? Street?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It looks wet. Can you see that picture?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, over here we're talking about.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know. Is it because you've got puddles and pooling over here as well? So again, to me, the whole scene, it looks kind of chaotic. In one way, it's very organized, but in another way, when you sort of look at the details in here, who knows what the runoff might have been, that's the thing. I think if we can get some oil experts involved, kind of old school oil experts, they might be able to decipher what exactly what it all means to see. But it's a muddy, it's a soft environment all through here. Then you have the train tracks right here, and you've got heavy duty trains here. So then you wonder too, well, how soft can the ground be there? I mean, they're obvious, it's supporting the trains. So for me, this kind of conversation is a starting point. And what I'd like to do once we're back doing live presentations and things is invite out, oil experts and people like that who can come, and we can really have a more open-ended conversation. These to me are all starting points. And what I like about this group is I'll throw something out there like this, and people like you will take it and run with it. And someone will know someone who knows someone who's an expert. And that's when you start seeing comments. It's the one frustrating thing to me about the group is it's hard to manage all the comments. I'll see something that's so insightful, but it's buried in a thread with like 14 little sub-conversations. And I fear that like those comments are like little jewels that are just going to remain buried. I'll sometimes try and bump them up or screenshot them or whatever. Because there's so much interesting, vital information being shared. Once you create a community that's 5,000, 6,000 strong, you're going to have a lot of great opinions and a lot of knowledgeable locals who are able to thread things in. So that's the one thing is trying to isolate the really eliminating comments. And it's hard because we all do other things during the day. It's a small part of the day. But that said, late at night sometimes I try and just find those little nuggets and call them out and whatnot. So again, maybe we'll have a live session in person where we can, pull together some more information. Glenn.
I'm kind of curious, when was the Northam Ranch house built? Because that location where that market is like less than, 1,300 feet away.
The Northam Ranch was established in the late 1890s.
So it would have been there.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely.
Just south to the left of that photograph.
Yeah, well exactly. And what happens is you had an agricultural region essentially. The Northam Ranch was, hundreds of acres. And, this is where oil changes everything. And this is where, you've got companies like the sugar company that all of a sudden the actual structures are being handed over to the oil company, or being purchased by the oil companies to house people, to be functioning, adjuncts of the new oil industry. So oil, that's the thing. It's 100 years ago this year. Had the virus thing not happened, I was talking to the city about creating an oil program this year, sort of an ongoing lecture series. It was so interesting, and there's so many local experts who are still here to shed light on this. But what oil did to the area, it's almost unfathomable. And all of a sudden, all the agriculture, the Northam Ranch, which is it's a working farm. They've got animals and crops and everything, but now it's butting right up against this forest of wooden derricks. And just,
wow.
I always wonder about that transitional period, about what it must have been like and what the adjustments had to be. Just on a physical level, if you lived in Huntington back then, all of a sudden you're hearing and smelling things on a daily basis that were not there weeks ago. Yeah. And, we all know those amazing photos looking off the pier where you look back toward PCH or then Ocean Avenue. And that's where you see the forest, the really well-known forest of oil derricks. And those did not come without sound or smell. So I think I love talking to people who were there during that period, just to capture their thoughts about what it was like. It wasn't always pleasant, but again, it's certainly an important transitional period. And again, what I love about this photo is it gives you a little bit of everything. You've got all these industries that are sort of commingling, but then ultimately cannibalizing each other. And it's such an active photo. That's what really compels me to talk more about it.
I like what the other gentleman said about somebody must have been in charge of building all of these derricks, and it brought me to that movie, There Will Be Blood. With Daniel Day-Lewis, and I wonder how.
Lost its sound.
There was somebody who was just a madman who was making all these derricks, and it went all the way to Long Beach.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, and I think the oil. It didn't necessarily catch everyone by surprise. People knew this was coming. At the Bulls Chica Gun Club in early 1900s, if you didn't know, what they were detecting in the water they were tapping out of the ground, it had a very high natural gas content. They didn't think that much of it. They were separating it and using the gas to light their lamps and all of that. But then at a certain point, someone said, wait a minute, that usually is an indicator there's oil here. So when it came hard and fast, 1919, 1920. And again, you've got the day oil is discovered, in a month, the city population, I think, goes from 1,000 to 5,000. The exponential growth in a month was 5-fold. And from there, it just goes berserk, So again, you really can't measure the effect that oil had on the city. And a picture like this really gets to it. Because if that date is true, if this picture is late 1920 or so, it's mind-boggling what took place in under a year in terms of physical structures and all of that. So it's
it's probably that water is probably just runoff from the derricks just coming out.
That's what you have to figure. These are all active wells producing, not just oil, but like you say, steam. You look at the steam in the air. There's water attached to all of this. So again, I think once we can all get in person and break this down, to me, the fun of a group like this is the detective work involved. And when you've got things like Sanborn maps, which I highly recommend if you want to go on the Library of Congress website, they've got some great, Aaron, I think you were looking at those, right? Aren't they wonderful? I mean, they tell so many stories when you read them. And again, it's all about those notations that the map writers were creating. They were on the ground talking to people. They were interviewing people. They were adding as much as they could beyond just what we saw physically, structurally, and addresses and things like that. There's great little backstory you can learn, and they're beautiful maps. I find them aesthetically very pleasing to look at. They use very interesting colors, and there's just, I thought there was great care and consideration into making them look like something as opposed to just pedestrian maps. So I would love to recreate a couple of those at a certain point, and make those available. This idea of really high quality sandborn color maps. Because if you look at the downtown area, all of a sudden you can see where the first parking garages were, where the first gas stations were, with little notes about who owned it, what might have happened there. So they really are a lot of fun. Anything else this morning, guys? I've really enjoyed this. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I hope it was interesting. I mean, again, you never know. Like for me, I get hung up on weird things sometimes. And again, I will lose sleep over a photograph trying to think about who took it, what it was like that day, what the perspective was. I love looking up the fact that you can look at all the oil wells historically in Huntington and figure out that physically that probably is the well where he took that photo. And so what was it like for him to get up there? What was that process like? To lug his gear up. This is still pretty early in the game for this kind of photography. So to lug your gear up, to get in place like that. I mean, there's a story in how the photo was taken. So that's what kind of drives me, these kinds of backstories and things. And again, the most important thing is now we know precisely where that photo was taken. That's no longer a mystery. And so if you're ever in that area, you can sort of stop and let your mind wander a little bit, put that picture together. So anyway, you guys, with that, I'm going to stop recording here.